Human migration is a shared human experience, and while the conditions of those experiences vary from person to person, the term gives us the opportunity to defuse this politically charged conversation so that we can come to discover our shared humanity. We live in an age where the word immigration is a highly politicized and polarizing term. The moment the word is mentioned, one can begin feeling a change in the air and a shift in the atmosphere that leaves people feeling anxious and slightly defensive. It's important to address these feelings, as oftentimes they are projected upon us by larger society, rather than our own Christian faith. The spirit of the age is one of chaos, anxiety, and division. However, as Christians, we believe in a different spirit, one that can bring order to the chaos, peace to our anxiety, and unity to the divisions in our broken and fractured world. It is the Spirit of God that leads us into understanding the needs of those who have experienced suffering in life and guides us on the path to discerning how we should respond to those needs as fellow travelers along the way. Therefore, this course will begin the conversation on immigration by first approaching the topic from the larger lens of human migration, or the movement of people. Human migration is a shared human experience, and while the conditions of those experiences vary from person to person, the term gives us the opportunity to defuse this politically charged conversation, if only for a moment, so that we can come to discover our shared humanity. The second way we will approach this topic is by allowing the Bible to be our starting point for this conversation, before we arrive to any political conclusions. In doing so, we will come to discover that the Bible is full of stories of human migration, and that there is much to be learned about God's heart towards immigrants and refugees through these stories. And what better place to start than the very beginning? This first lesson explores the theme of human migration in the first movement of Scripture known as creation. The first mention of migration in the biblical narrative is found in Genesis 1:2, where the author tells us that the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. It is here where we see that God is revealed not only as a God who creates, but also as a God who moves. It is these two attributes that are used to describe God in the creation narrative. Therefore, if the first mention of divine migration is mentioned in Genesis 1:2, then the first mention of human migration is found in Genesis 1:28, where the author of Genesis tells us that God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." This passage, known as the creation mandate, is the first command that God gives to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And in this passage, we find not only the command to reproduce, but also the command to migration. When God tells Adam and Eve to fill the earth and subdue it, God is commanding them to a life on the move. Now, it's important to stop here and notice that this command to move is not a negative command. It is not a result of an economic crisis or food shortage in the Garden of Eden. Rather, it is a divine call from God that is given to humanity so that they might accomplish God's missional purposes for their lives in this world. In this passage, the call to migration is a call to mission. Therefore, if the creation mandate is the mission statement for humanity, what then was God's original vision when he instituted this divine call to migrate? God's vision for migration can be summarized in 3 words: God blessed them. These 3 words reveal God's original intention for migration to be a blessing, for it would result in the fulfillment of God's missional purpose for humanity to spread his glory across the earth. God's vision for migration was something that was good, pure, and undefiled by the sinful patterns of our modern world. It was a call to be a positive force of God's goodness and promises in the world that he created. This language of blessing is also found in the opening verses of Genesis 12, verses 1-3, when God says to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household, to the land I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." The command God gave to Abram to leave his country of origin to an unknown land was the first step in establishing the Abrahamic covenant. Abram's decision to obey God by faith would result in many descendants, God's presence, a promised land, and the blessing of the nations through his seed. And this blessing of the nations through the seed of Abraham would one day come to be revealed in the person of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. This means that God's plan to bless the nations was predicated upon Abram's decision to listen to God's call to leave his homeland. God's mission for humanity was revealed in the positive response towards God's divine call to move. So the creation mandate shows us God's mission for humanity. It reveals God's original vision for migration to be a blessing. And finally, it teaches us that the freedom of movement is an intrinsic attribute of what it means to be made in the image of God. The image of God is grounded in Genesis 1:27, which states, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." Oftentimes, this notion of the image of God is raised in conversations of immigration to point out the inherent dignity and worth of immigrants and refugees. This idea is grounded in the tradition of Christian personalism and is often foundational in Christian conversations on human rights. However, at a more basic level, the image of God also shows us that just as God has the capacity to rule, create, and move in this world, so also humanity has been given the capacity to be rulers, creators, and to move across God's good creation. The freedom of movement is a functional attribute of what it means to be made in the image of God. The period of creation teaches us who God is and who we are in relation to God, and the revelation of God's purposes for humanity. God's original mission for humanity was to fill the earth, and his vision for migration was to be a blessing. And as human beings made in the image of God, our capacity to move and to move freely is part of God's original design for our lives as bearers of his image. In the next session, I will talk about how the entrance of sin corrupted not only the human condition, but also the divine call to migration.